Thank you very much. Wow, this is amazing. I want to congratulate you not just on Liberty's athletic victories, but also on being one of the few remaining open-minded colleges in America. I mean, imagine the prospect of a Bernie Sanders or a Jesse Jackson speaking at Liberty. We don't actually have to imagine these things because they have happened, and the reception that you gave them was cordial, respectful, intellectual, civil, and contrasts this with the reception accorded conservative speakers on the left-wing campus. It's totally the opposite. I'm very excited to be here talking about some themes in my new book called The Big Lie. In the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that if you're choosing among books, Hillary has a new book out. It's called What Happened? What Happened? Now, I've recently learned that due to an inexcusable and astounding mistake, the titles of our two books became interchanged. Hers actually should have been The Big Lie. Now, I think you know that we're living through a very extraordinary political moment in American history. Even as we speak, left-wing thugs are rampaging through the South, pulling down Confederate monuments. Now, when I first saw this site, and let's be clear about what this site is. This is Democrats knocking down the statues of other Democrats. So at the first glance, I thought to myself, maybe the Democratic Party is coming to a moment of true self-recognition, true honesty, true willingness to account for its own past. Maybe the Democrats, for the first time in all their history, are saying, yes, we did it. We are the party of slavery, of segregation, of Jim Crow, of the Ku Klux Klan, of racial terrorism. We are the party that attempted to block the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we are now just so thoroughly ashamed of our own history that we have to take down these terrible reminders that we keep seeing in the form of statues of who we are. But of course, I realize that is not what is going on right now. What is actually going on is something more like the big lie. And the big lie is the effort on the part of Democrats to take the things that they did and to project the blame and the responsibility onto someone else. They want to blame the white man. They want to blame America. They want to blame the South. Now, to be honest, the secession debate of 1860 was between the North and the South. But the slavery debate, which had been going on for much longer, the slavery debate was not a North-South debate. It was actually between the pro-slavery Democratic Party, North and South, and the anti-slavery Republican Party. In my last movie, Hillary's America, I made the observation that in 1860, the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. All the slaves in the United States, 4 million of them, were owned by Democrats. Think about that. Now, since then, in the last year, the left has been thrashing around to find a single counterexample to undermine my thesis, and all they'd have to do is give me a list of 5 Republicans who own slaves, and I'd have to take it back. But they can't do it. After intense labors, one Democratic PhD student said, I found an example. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave on his wife's side. And I said, that's true, but at the time that happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. So even this single counterexample doesn't really work. Now, since Trump's election, you might have noticed that the big story, I call it the meta story of American politics has shifted, and the left has moved from playing the race card to now also playing the fascism card. The fascism card. Trump is a fascist. The Republicans, the conservatives, the Christians, these are the neo-Nazis of our time. Now, why does the left say this? What's the point of making these kinds of accusations? It's not just intended as an insult. It's intended to be a legitimation, a justification for all kinds of extreme behavior that would otherwise be inexcusable. Ever since Trump's election, we've been seeing all kinds of craziness from the left. Let's convince the electors not to vote for the candidate that they're pledged to. Mainstream Democrats refusing to attend the inauguration. Let's disrupt the inauguration. Let's go on the campuses, dress up in masks, carry baseball bats and bike locks, and beat up conservative speakers who show up to try to offer a very rarely presented alternative point of view. Now, how can you condone this kind of madness? Well, the left's answer is we condone it because it's like we are fighting Hitler in the 1930s. If Trump is a fascist, we have every justification to use every means necessary to get rid of him. Even if we stage a quasi-coup, it's warranted, because anything would have been warranted to get Hitler out of there before he could go on to cause all the carnage that he did. Now, this notion that fascism and Nazism are phenomena of the right, they are somehow right-wing. This notion long predates Trump. It actually goes back to World War II, when, in a sense, the big lie was concocted. It was manufactured. Now, why do I call it a big lie? The term the big lie was actually used by Adolf Hitler. And Hitler made the point that small lies are actually kind of easy to catch. The trouble in Benghazi was due to a video. Small lie, easy to catch. If you want to keep your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Small lie, easy to catch. But big lies, Hitler says, are more sneaky because they're so large, you can't get your head around them. And so it's actually easier to peddle a big lie than it is to peddle a small lie. And the big lie is the lie that fascism and Nazism are somehow right-wing. In reality, the opposite is the truth. The founder of fascism is not Hitler, it's Mussolini, who established the first fascist regime in the world. When Mussolini established the Fascist Party, he received a telegram of congratulations from Lenin. Why? Because Mussolini was the most famous Marxist in Italy. Lenin recognized Mussolini as a fellow revolutionary on the left. Hitler's party was officially called the National Socialist Party. And, you know, I was watching a little bit of the Emmys last night, and I was thinking that some of you may have seen on social media, Stephen Colbert did his infamous Nazi salute. He was trying to actually describe Trump. But here we saw at the Emmys, literally, if Stephen Colbert, well, first of all, if he did his Nazi salute, the ratings might have been a little better. But if he literally opened the Nazi 25-point platform and began to read from it, nationalization of industry, universal health care. Let's go after the greedy, swindling bankers, and so on and so on and so on. He literally would have gotten thunderous applause from the people in the audience. In other words, what I'm saying is the platform of the Nazi Party was manifestly left-wing. And historically, in America, the left recognized the Nazis, recognized the Italian fascists as kindred spirits. Hitler, in fact, got some of his most maniacal and destructive ideas from the American left. I'm not saying that there were similar things going on. I'm saying Hitler literally lifted it from the blueprints, from the example supplied by the Democrats and by the left. To take a single example, this is, I would call it, the Hitler-Margaret Sanger connection. Today, if you pick up a brochure of Planned Parenthood and you thumb through it, you get the idea that Margaret Sanger, the founder of the organization, was a champion of choice. She wanted every woman to decide whether and how many offspring to have. When you read this, your kind of big lie antenna should be going off. Because the real Margaret Sanger wasn't like this at all. The real Margaret Sanger opposed choice. A slogan that she had, which was published in her magazine, Birth Control Review, more children from the fit, fewer children from the unfit. This is the chief aim of birth control, end quote. So Margaret Sanger's view is that if you are unfit, of course in her view, then you should be prevented from reproducing at all. No kids. Ideally by persuasion, but if you refused, by force. And the progressive eugenicists in America, the gang around Margaret Sanger, had basically two approaches to achieving this goal. The goal of preventing the unfit from reproducing. The first was forced sterilization. This is the one that Margaret Sanger supported. The other one was euthanasia, which basically referred to killing off people who were seen as sick, disabled, old, and so on. Now, amazingly, the Nazis got a wind of this. Through international conferences, they learned about what the American progressives were proposing. There was a California progressive, Paul Popenoe, who said, listen, if we're going to have euthanasia, we can't kill people one at a time. We need to have a more systematic way of doing it. And he proposed, quote, lethal chambers to carry this out. And what I'm saying is that the Nazis go, what the Americans are proposing is fantastic. We're going to run with it. The Nazi sterilization laws of 1933 and the Nazi euthanasia laws of 1935, which were in fact the first gas chambers. The Nazis used poison gas, carbon monoxide gas, to kill initially not Jews, but the sick, the disabled, what Hitler called imbeciles, and so on. And what I'm saying is that the Nazis adopted almost wholesale the blueprints supplied by Margaret Sanger and her American progressive buddies in the eugenics movement. Now, I've been speaking about fascism, I've been speaking about Nazism. It's worth taking a second to ask the question, what is fascism? What does it actually mean? Because if you knew the meaning of fascism and Nazism, you could then decide better, does it belong on the left or does it belong on the right? Now, the very term fascism comes from a bundle of sticks held together so tightly, bound together so compactly that they can't fall apart. And the fascist idea was that societies are stronger collectively than they are individually. It's easier to break one stick at a time than to break a whole bunch of sticks put together. Fascism, as Mussolini defined it, is everything in the state and nothing outside the state. So what this means is that the state, the government, is kind of like a living organism. And each of us individuals, we are like cells within the organism. Our individual value is basically zero. Our individual rights are non-existent. Our importance as individuals, as cells, is solely the degree to which we serve the collective, the state. So, I ask you, does this actually sound more like the platform of the Republican Party or more like the platform of the Democratic Party? Fascism has always been on the left. FDR knew this. President Roosevelt, in the New Deal, sent members of his brain trust to fascist Italy because he saw fascism as more progressive than the New Deal. He wanted his best thinkers to study fascism, to bring some of those ideas to America. He admired Mussolini as a fellow leftist. And Mussolini, for his part, revered FDR. It was a mutual admiration society. Mussolini reviews FDR's book in an Italian magazine, and I summarize his review in this way: great guy, he's one of us, he's a fascist. He's a fascist. Now, interestingly, after World War II, when fascism and Nazism became irreparably stained by the reputation of Holocaust, when American troops went into the concentration camps and out came those ghostly, emaciated figures, suddenly fascism and Nazism became permanently dirty words, incendiary words, symbols of horror. And the progressives in America, who were then just starting to come to power in academia, in the media, in Hollywood, they actually knew that fascism and Nazism were on the left. They knew about the deep connections between the Democrats and the fascists. They knew, for example, that the Nuremberg laws, in which Hitler essentially made Jews into second-class citizens, prohibited them from intermarrying with other Germans, confiscated Jewish property, had state segregation against Jews, segregating them into ghettos. These laws, by the way, were directly lifted from the democratic laws of the Jim Crow South. Again, I'm not saying that they were parallel or similar. I'm saying that the leading Nazis who drafted the Nuremberg laws had in their hands the democratic laws from America. By the way, I should point out, every segregation law in the American South was passed by a democratic legislature, signed by a democratic governor. There is no exception to this rule. So these are not American laws, these are democratic laws. But after the war, as I say, the progressives realized how damning and deep their association was with fascism. And so they decided, we got to cover it up. All the stuff that Dinesh is talking about, we got to make sure all that stuff is left out of the textbooks. We don't want young people finding out about it. Why? Because if they did, they'd never want to be a Democrat. They'd never want to be a progressive. And most cunning of all, we have to take fascism and Nazism from the left-wing column, where they've always belonged, and we've got to move it over into the right-wing column. Now, this is easier said than done. In other words, big lies are not that easy to pull off. How do you get intelligent people, not dummies, intelligent people, to know something that isn't true? How do you achieve that? Well, first of all, it really helps when you dominate the three major megaphones of our culture, which is academia, the media, and the whole entertainment industry, not just Hollywood, but Broadway, the music industry, the comedians. If you have all that, you can put out a lot of big lies. Why? Because even if some guy in the audience knows it's a big lie, they don't have a big enough megaphone to contest it. So that's one way you pull off big lies. You kind of own the bullhorns to promulgate them. The other way you pull off big lies is you have to be intellectually very crafty. And one thing we can say about the left is it is crafty. And so, in moving fascism and Nazism from the left-wing column to the right-wing column, they realized we can't go around saying that fascism is the philosophy of the centralized state. Everyone's going to look at us. We've got to strip the socialism out of National Socialism. We've got to sort of redefine fascism. Make people talk about fake media, we need fake scholarship. We need to create a fictional fascism and take that fictional fascism and pin that fascist tail on the Republican elephant. And so the left came up with this idea, let's redefine fascism so fascism is not centralized government, which it's always been. Let's just say fascism is ultra-nationalism. Ultra-nationalism. So here's Trump. I want to make America great again. Hey, that sounds a lot like Hitler. Didn't he want to make Germany great again? Now, in order to dissect this big lie and expose it, you've got to realize that nationalism is in fact not essential to fascism at all. In fact, nationalism is not exclusively on the right. There are plenty of nationalists on the left. I'm originally from India. Gandhi, the founder of modern India, was a nationalist. Mandela in South Africa was a nationalist. All the anti-colonial leaders were nationalists. Winston Churchill was a nationalist. Abraham Lincoln, the American founders, all nationalists. Now, does it make any sense to call these people all fascists? No. So here we begin our task of unmasking the big lie. Unmasking the big lie by showing that this effort to pin fascism on the right is an intellectual fraud of mammoth proportions. Mammoth proportions. And you might say, well, Dinesh, this may all be true, but you're talking a little bit in a historical vein. What about now? What about now? So I want to point out that now, today, the party that reflects not only fascist history, we've talked about that, not only fascist ideology, the centralized state, but even fascist economics and fascist tactics, that is coming today exclusively from the left. And let me show why. The essential economic meaning of fascism, if you literally just Google it, look up the definition, you'll see, is state-directed capitalism. That's the meaning of fascism. Now, interestingly, if we look at the Democratic Party now, it doesn't advocate socialism of the Marxist type. Because true socialist governments do what? They nationalize industry. The government takes over the industry, the government will take over energy or banking, and the government itself will administer those industries. That's Marxian socialism. We don't have that. What Obamacare, for example. In Obamacare, we have private hospitals, we have private insurance companies, but the state tells them what to do. The state sets the prices. The state tells them who's eligible for insurance or for health care. The state denies this procedure or that procedure. In other words, state-directed capitalism. Under Obama, we have seen the state direction of all kinds of industries that were previously largely private. The state takes over the banks, tells them what to do. Takes over the investment firms, tells them what to do. Takes over increasingly the energy sector. We already mentioned the healthcare sector. Hillary and Bernie wanted to do this to education. So this, what I'm saying is, this state-directed capitalism in which you have private actors, but the state is in a sense quarterbacking them, this is the classic and clinical definition of fascism in an economic sense. And now I turn to the fascism of tactics. The fascism of tactics. You know, when I compare the ragtag white supremacists in Charlottesville with the Antifa groups on the campus, Trump, by the way, took a lot of heat for saying the violence is coming from all sides. But not only was Trump right about that, in fact, he's been proven right about that, but he greatly understated the case. He greatly understated the case because the white supremacists in Charlottesville have no cultural or political power. The Ku Klux Klan is actually a shadow of what it used to be. Today, if the Ku Klux Klan has a rally in any part of the country, they'd be lucky to get 100 guys, and those 100 guys would be encircled by 500 guys protesting them. Now, the Ku Klux Klan at one time had real power. In the 1920s, for example, the Klan marched 50,000 hooded Klansmen down Fifth Avenue in New York City. Where were they going, by the way? To the Democratic National Convention. Many of them were delegates. But these ragtag white supremacists of today are marginal. But what the left wants you to do is say, let's focus exclusively on them. Why? So you can actually ignore the far more dangerous intimidation, violence, bullying that we are doing on a much more systematic scale. Now look at these Antifa guys for a minute at Berkeley. By the way, Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, is a far less liberal place in the true meaning of the term than Liberty. The free speech movement actually belongs here at Liberty, because speakers can freely speak, not just people like me. So think about what's happening. The people who are genuinely intolerant, the left, are accusing the people who are tolerant, us, of being intolerant. The Antifa guys, if you look at them, with their masks and their hoods, their weapons, you listen to them, you watch them, they seem not only the natural descendants of the Ku Klux Klan, in other words, a paramilitary wing of the left, just as the Klan was in the 20s and 30s. But they also seem the natural equivalents or counterparts to Mussolini's black shirts of the 1920s, or Hitler's brown shirts of the 1930s. The only difference is that the old fascists were happy to accept the name. Yes, we're fascists. The new fascists purport and pretend to be anti-fascists. And yet, these Antifa anti-fascists are not the most dangerous fascists in America, because even they represent, you might call it, the fascism of the street. And the fascism of the street is not half as dangerous as the fascism of the institutions. One reason that Antifa can maraud freely at Berkeley is that the mayor of Berkeley is in their pocket. He's a member of one of their Facebook groups, reportedly. He's the one who tells the cops to stand down, to give Antifa room to maneuver. Unlike the ragtag white supremacists in Charlottesville, Antifa has powerful allies among the faculty, among the deans, in Hollywood, and in the mainstream of the Democratic Party. The fascists I worry about are the fascists at Google, who can throw a guy out, fire him, for writing a memo mildly critical of their diversity policy. Or the powerful studio bosses in Hollywood who will destroy your career. Even if you're a famous guy, they'll ruin you if you're on the wrong side of the political aisle. Or powerful deans who run billion-dollar endowments who will topple the career of a young academic, turn him into or her into a pariah because they happen to speak out on behalf of conservatism or Trump. Or in the era of Obama and Hillary, Hillary's still wondering, why did I lose? What happened? Well, what happened is you became the most corrupt public figure in US history. That's why you lost. But under Obama and Hillary, what the left would do is mobilize the weapons of the state, the IRS, the FBI, the Justice Department, to go after their critics. This is the most dangerous kind of fascism of all. It's the fascism in which the government comes to visit you, not with two guys in a suit with a folder, but with police cars, helicopters overhead, and SWAT teams. SWAT teams directed at American citizens. So this is the fascism of our time. It is a phenomenon not of Trump, not of the right, but entirely of the left. And what I want to do today here is to alert you to it. Why? Because knowledge is a very powerful thing. The best way to diffuse big lies is with big truths. And the beauty of living today is you don't have to take my word for it. You can check it out. You can look it up. And once you get this knowledge, you become a very dangerous Christian and a very dangerous American. I'm very proud to say I am today kind of a dangerous American. Since the election, all these guys on the left, Bill Maher, Rachel Maddow, Chris Matthews, Van Jones, all these guys have been bloviating about fascism this and fascism that. Now, as soon as my book comes out, they're all really hard to reach. They're nowhere to be found. They've all gone down rabbit holes. Why? Because they know that when big lies are confronted with facts, historical truths, they can't keep going. And so think about this. The left has a race card. In fact, I took on the race card in my last movie, Hillary's America. And they have a fascism card. And they use these two cards not to have a debate, but to prevent debate. Their point is, when we play the race card, we are calling you the bad guys, and we don't need to talk to you. When we call you a fascist, it's another way of saying that our job is not to converse with you, but to repress you, to shut you down. After all, who would want to have a conversation or a debate with Hitler in 1933? And so these cards are used to shut down debate, to shut us up. And a lot of Republicans haven't woken up to this. In fact, they respond in a very sort of weak and invertebrate fashion. Don't be like that. Instead, be curious, be truly open-minded, be willing to go where knowledge takes you, be willing to stand up for your convictions. You are, in fact, the enemy of the big lie. You are, in fact, the standing weapons and instruments of truth. Thank you very much.